Hello, and welcome to this webinar. So this is a webinar in a collaboration between the Society for the Environment and the Royal Society of Chemistry. And today we are looking at Chartered Environmentalist, or CEnv, in the context of chemistry. So we have an excellent panel of Chartered Environmentalists who have registered via the RSC, and we're going to be talking to them about what it means, why they've done it, and why they might think you might be interested in doing it, for example. So my name is Phil Underwood. I'm the engagement manager at the Society for the Environment. And first of all, I'm just going to give you a very brief introduction into who the Society for the Environment are and how that links into the Royal Society of Chemistry and how they link together and what that might mean for you. So the Society for the Environment, we have a Royal Charter that allows us to award 3 professional registrations: Chartered Environmentalist, Registered Environmental Practitioner, and Registered Environmental Technician. And so we hold the register for the registrants who fit under those particular registrations. So there are currently well over 7,500 Chartered Environmentalists, to give you a bit of an idea. And all of those Chartered Environmentalists are registered via one of our 24 licensed professional bodies. The RSC are one of those. So as a member of the RSC, you can become a Chartered Environmentalist through your membership if you meet the criteria and so on. So that is a very brief nutshell into what it is. And Chartered Environmentalist is a chartership, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to hand straight over to David to introduce himself and to give a bit of an idea of how RSC fits into things.
So thank you, Phil. Hello, everyone. My name is David Moulding, and I am the CEnv officer here at the RSC. What that effectively means is I handle the day-to-day running of Chartered Environmentalists within the Royal Society of Chemistry, and I look after the application process, sort of doing everything in the background. As mentioned by Phil, Chartered Environmentalist is licensed to us from the Society for the Environment. It is one of the series of charterships which we offer. And today we've got 3 RSC members who have recently been awarded CEnv. Neil Graham, Laura Cruikshank, and Joseph Hornton. I'll let them introduce themselves properly later, as I know I won't do them justice. But just to sort of give a little quick high-level view of the application process within the RSC, if you want to gain Chartered Environmentalist status, you need to be either a member, so MRSC, or fellow, FRSC. You need to be operating at a master's level. And you can do this by either having a master's level degree, holding a equivalent level chartership with the RSC, so chartered chemist, chartered scientist, or by preparing an equivalency report. You'll then also need to have a 4 years of relevant experience at a master's level. And if you meet all these, then you put in good standing to apply for CEnv status. So what would happen then is, if you were going to apply, you can find all the information on our website, as well as some supporting materials. For when you were actually to submit, you would send the application to myself along with 2 supporters. I would have a quick review and then send it on to 2 assessors who would review it. If they think it's suitable, you then get an interview with those assessors, just to sort of go through the application. And if they both feel you are operating at that level, you can then be awarded Chartered Environmentalist. So as I say, that's a very, very high level view. There's a lot more detail to that, but I'm happy to answer questions at a later time. With that in mind, I would like to move on and introduce the first person to introduce himself, Neil Graham. If you could get there, fantastic. I'll let you introduce yourself, give a bit of information, and explain why you chose to apply for Chartered Environmentalist.
Right. Well, thank you for having me. So my name is Neil Graham, and I work in the field of chemical regulations. So I'm a consultant that would interface between industry and regulators in the application and the placing of predominantly agrochemicals or plant protection products on the market. My role predominantly looks at environmental fate modeling, the transport and the fate of contaminants in soils, groundwaters, and surface waters, and also conducting ecotoxicological risk assessments. These are basic modeling and outputs plus higher tier applications. So these applications would be put forward to the likes of the CRD here in the UK and different member states within the EU under EFSA. So in a nutshell, that's what I do. But my background before that is chemistry. So I'm an environmental chemist. Before that, I was an analytical and radiochemist. So I've applied to be a chartered environmentalist right off the heels of an application to become a chartered chemist. And I tried to carry that forward because I've moved to the UK from Canada, and I was a chartered chemist in Canada. And I wanted to ensure that I kept some form of professional designation. And the reasoning why I've decided to apply for Chartered Environmentalists is, as I said, I think that in any field it's really important that we hold ourselves to a professional standard. And I felt that being a Chartered Environmentalist was going to hit that mark. I think it's important that the designation gets put in place now to demonstrate the level of professionalism that we will put forward, and it also marks how it is that we see ourselves and what levels we need to attain. Industry will have one level, regulators for myself would have another. And I think it's important that we put ourselves forward on the best foot and show that we're going to do what's best and what's most pragmatic. The application process itself, maybe we'll delve into that a bit later on, but as I said, it was fresh off the heels of the Chartered Chemist application. So my view on that application and how I approached the questions was a little bit different because I had experience from the first application. But I would, if I had to give a quick bit of advice to anybody who's looking at applying the Chartered Environmentalists, the Society for Chartered Environmentalists, they have quite a lot of resources on their website. And on the website, there is, I think, a YouTube video, two gentlemen speaking about the application process. I found that quite useful, although it is quite long, but it was quite good and quite handy to go through. So I would recommend you use the resources on the website for sure. And as I'm probably out of material to talk about myself, I'm going to hand back to you, David, and thank you for the opportunity.
No problem. You'll just notice that Phil's popped a message in the chat. Feel free, excuse me, sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied there. Feel free to submit any questions during this webinar. I'll allow the other two panelists to introduce themselves and have discussion, and then we'll start to answer any questions that are appearing in the box, but feel free to just fire them out as and when they come to you. But in that sense, I will allow Laura to come off a mute and introduce herself and give a bit of backstory to why she became a Chartered Environmentalist.
Thank you, David. So I am a chemist working predominantly within the waste industry as part of a wider oil and gas services company up in the northeast of Scotland. So Chartered Environmentalist status was the obvious choice for me based on what I do. So my background in similar way to Neil's is I'm an analytical environmental chemist. Completed my PhD looking at contaminants within the environment, and then from that moved out into industry. The one thing that I found working specifically within the oil and gas industry is that it's actually quite isolating as a chemist. I run a team of 4 chemists within our waste site, and that is 75% of the chemists that are employed by the company in total. So it's the opportunities to discuss things, to look at professional development within the company are very limited. And I made the decision, it's a personal decision, it's not related specifically to my career and work, although it has helped with my career development since. But it was a personal commitment that I made to go towards Chartered Environmentalist status. Someone is at the doorbell. Sorry, that's my children just arrived home. To work towards Chartered Environmentalist, to give myself that kind of validation of what I do, and that push towards improving and identifying the areas that I can make an impact as part of the oil and gas industry, which is always the villain in anything environmental. I think a lot of what I do is working with our clients to improve how they can deal with their waste, how they can reduce their impact. And it fit perfectly with that as a goal. I actually, and it's not often I say this because I don't like filling in forms, I really enjoyed the process of applying to be for CEnv status. It gave me an opportunity that I don't get in my day-to-day job to look back at what I would do and analyze and consider that those competencies that aren't directly related to what I do. They're not how well I act as a chemist, how well I act as a waste manager, how well I act as a line manager, but they all link into that. And I found I discovered a lot about myself that I hadn't expected whilst I was doing it, even, voluntary work that I do, and the impact and how that all leads into it. I found was a really actually valuable part of the process. Like Neil, I use the website a lot to help guide me, especially as there wasn't really many people I could speak to and discuss my application within my work. So it's I reached out to a lot of former colleagues in the academic world to kind of help. But I think Neil, I think that's I've reached the end of what I have to say about myself. So I'll pass back to David. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And I'm glad to hear that the application process was a positive one for yourself. And just before we move on to Joseph, it's something I want to touch on is that in conversations I've had with previous colleagues, you'll find that when filling the application, there will be activities and projects that you've undertaken, which might not necessarily from the initial viewpoint have an environmental focus, but actually when you delve a bit deeper, do have a knock-on environmental sustainability effect and very much are applicable to the CEnv award. So to touch on that is, there's a lot of what you do which will meet the criteria, so don't be too disheartened if you read over the application form and think, oh, I don't have anything to meet this. I'm confident you will do. Thank you very much, and I'll pass on to our third panelist, Joseph, and let him introduce himself and why he decided to go down the CEnv route.
Hello, thank you, David. My name is Joe Horton, or Joseph Horton, don't really mind which, and I am currently a research fellow working at the University of Leeds. Well, I'm part-time at the University of Leeds and part-time research fellow at the University of Arts, London, which is kind of an interesting place for a chemist to find themselves. I decided to go into so to give you a bit of background from where I come from, I did a MChem chemistry degree at the University of York. I then did a PhD in green chemistry, specifically at the Green Chemistry Centre of Excellence there, focusing around food waste valorization. So I was looking at creating biorefinery systems for industrial food waste. I won't go too much into the detail of that, but I could talk anyone's ear off if you're interested. And at another point, I then moved to Leeds after my first postdoc, which was at the University of York again, where I was looking at taking my lab scale process and bringing it to pilot scale, ready to be taken on to commercial scale. And at Leeds, I'm looking at sustainable textiles. So I've kind of taken a step out of that pure waste valorization route and gone into a textile, still focusing around waste valorization, but more into the material side of things, which is where I came into contact with the University of Arts London, because the project that I'm working on is funded by the BFTT, the Business of Fashion and Textile Technology. And that's where I got in contact with London. I decided to go for Chartered Environmentalist status because I had been doing environmental chemistry and sustainable chemistry pretty much throughout my entire research career. And I really wanted to have because in my job at the moment, I'm contacting a lot of new companies, I'm contacting a lot of new people. I wanted a way of proving that I have been in this field for a long time, and I kind of know what I'm talking about, because I am an early career researcher, and I felt as though like having an official designation to my name would assist me in any conversations that I was having. I think that for me, applying, similar to what Laura said, I actually really enjoyed the application process because as anyone in academia, and I imagine any sort of scientific field can tell you, imposter syndrome is a really prevalent problem in our field. So it was really nice to be able to validate myself that what I've done is worth something. And so it was really nice going back over my work and filling out the attributes to prove to myself that all the things that I've done. It's similar. It was a similar feeling to when I came to the end of my PhD, and I was looking back at the last 3 years of my life and going, what have I got to show for it? And then after about a month writing, I was having to cut things out of my PhD because I had too much. So it's always nice to look back over your past achievements and to sort of culminate them in a nice piece of work. I also think that what really excited me about CEnv is the multidisciplinary nature of it. So I love working between disciplines. I am a chemist first and foremost, but in my current job, I am working with like fashion designers and graphic designers. In my past, I've worked with all sorts of, from biologists to physicists to mechanical engineers, process engineers, commercial enterprises, management teams. And so I really enjoy working in that sort of space between the disciplines, so that you can have input into lots of different areas, because what I've discovered in my current role is the way that an artist approaches a problem and a chemist approaches a problem are very different things. And sometimes I'll be bashing my head against a brick wall for weeks, and I'll talk to I work with a PhD student down in London who's a fashion designer, and she'll say, why not try this? And it's something that I would have never thought of from a chemist perspective, but from a design perspective, it makes total sense. So that kind of multidisciplinary nature is something that really excites me, and it's something that the CEnv really does offer. The three panelists on the call today, we're all from very different backgrounds, and we all do very different things. But this Chartered Environmentalist is sort of an umbrella term that brings us all together. I think from the application process, I did use the website. The resources on there are very good. I also want to commend David, because I'm very sure he got fed up with the amount of emails that I kept on sending him, asking him questions, but he was always very supportive and very helpful and very patient with me, asking all the silly questions. So I definitely felt as though I had all the support in the world when I was applying. And the interview itself, I know that these sort of things can be very daunting and very terrifying. I likened it to walking into my Viva in some ways. It was an absolute joy. It was essentially me with two other people who have very similar worldviews. We all care about sustainability. We all care about the environment. Just talking through my experience, talking through, it was more like a discussion of what we think of as what is environmental sustainability and what directions we went. So it actually was really insightful for me. I came out of it not thinking so much to do with the test, and more just that it gave me loads of ideas that I then wanted to go and take into my role as a postdoctoral research fellow. I think that's kind of what I wanted to say. I'm, again, more than happy to answer questions. I imagine we're going to have a discussion, because from my experience with the interview in the Chartered Environmentalists, that's what I enjoyed the most, was that sort of discussion aspect, because everyone has different inputs and different ideas. And I'm especially excited to hear what Neil and Laura had to say, because again, I am an academic first and foremost. I have gone straight from university into my PhD, into my first postdoc, into my second postdoc. So having people from the industry, being a chartered environmentalist and being able to input is hugely, hugely valuable. But yeah, so I'll hand back to you, David.
Thank you very much, and glad to hear the interview was a very positive thing for you. And I suppose you touched on a point that I'd just like to say. We'll get a few, or get contacted by applicants asking about the interview in terms of what to expect, and it very much is just a conversation. So the assessors will prepare a series of questions based on your application, just to sort of gain a bit more information, try things out. But then they usually will throw in a few questions just out of pure interest, because they just want your perspective. They want to hear from someone within that industry, within that environment, and what their opinion is, because they're actually genuinely interested in it. So I'm glad to hear it was such a positive event. There are no questions currently in the chat box, but I have questions if I'm just going to jump in with my chair's perspective. And I actually typed this out. I'm going to go in reverse order of speakers, because Joe, you touched on it very heavily, is how do you as a chemist and a chartered environmentalist interact with non-chemists about environmental issues? And I'll go to Joe first, because you listed off a series of different professions and backgrounds there, so it felt right to start with yourself.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the most enjoyable and also most challenging parts of my job, and also has been for my entire research career pretty much, is how do you talk about sustainability without people immediately disregarding it and just say like, oh, you're greenwashing, or and I think the way that I do it is when I'm working with a partner, whatever discipline they're from, is I try and understand their discipline in depth. I try and learn from them, and then the more I learn about what they do, the more I can apply that to what I want to tell them. So if I'm talking to an artist, I'm not going to be talking about the hardcore chemistry around my sustainability. I'm going to be talking much more about the end uses. I'm not going to be talking about the sustainable films and fibers that I'm making in granular detail. I'm talking about the properties that are actually interesting to them. Same with industry. Industry want to be sustainable, but it's all about meeting that bottom line, making sure that it is actually profitable for them, as well as good for the environment. And it's that knowing how to talk to your audience, and that all comes from being willing to go into a meeting going, I know nothing about what you do, and I'm an expert in my field, you are an expert in your field, and then it's that backwards and forward, that collaborative process. I've been talking, I've had really, really, really good meetings with like plumbers and electricians, where like I have learned so much, because I have no idea about that field at all, and I've been able to then feed back more into like, okay, let's talk about this from a sustainability perspective, because that sort of meeting of the minds and that sort of cross collaborative research and also just work is really, really important.
Thank you. And I suppose the same question to you, Laura, as you mentioned, the oil and gas sometimes get a bad rep. How do you approach it from that perspective?
Yeah, so I would love to say that my discussions are collaborative at all points, but yeah, Joe touched on it. It's about the bottom line, and certainly having chartered environmentalist status helps in that it gives me a position as an expert in the room. Sustainability is the buzzword across industry at the moment, I think, but definitely in the oil and gas industry. My own company has just added sustainability as their third obsession, alongside service delivery and health and safety. It does come with a cost. And as a chemist who pretty much only works with non-chemists, and 90% of my conversations, start off with, I'm not going to bore you with the chemistry, or it's challenging. Again, going through the process and identifying those areas where the sustainability and the environmental issues meet with my day job has helped in those conversations, because it means I can go, oh, but what about when we did this? That's sustainability, and bring it down to examples, and use, if we adopt this new technology, yes, it will cost us extra money, but then the benefits downstream will be this, and we can use it as almost that kind of positive marketing spin of, we've also sustainable, we can be environmental conscious, and we can be a viable business. And I think it's making sure that business, certainly within the oil and gas industry, but I think with industry itself, and Neil possibly knows slightly more about this, having a broader kind of range, they do have a bad rep, but they do want to make a change, and they do want to be sustainable, and it's having those conversations in a way that allow them to adopt those issues without being afraid of where they're going.
Nice, thank you very much. And nice segue into Neil. Yeah, if with encountering different different companies and backgrounds and clients, how do you have those conversations?
Yeah, it's sometimes they're not easy conversations to have. I think from my perspective, it's really important to know you've got a bit the imposter syndrome that Joe had touched on, but it's all about knowing what you know, being realistic about that, and it is quite interdisciplinary, right? So I'm not just dealing with environmental modeling. I'm also dealing with ecotoxicology. So you're dealing with a bunch of people in different fields. But I am kind of caught in the middle, so to speak, between the regulators who have their laws that they've put in place, or they're upholding these laws and these rules, and the agrochemical companies, which also have a bad rap, and in trying to communicate between the two, because one, it's all the bottom line, and the other one, it is their mandates, and you have to translate between the two. And then, of course, you've got your client sometimes, which is industry. Sometimes a smaller company, and it's, as I said, the bottom line. But perhaps what they want to do isn't feasible. Feasible because it doesn't work, or feasible because it's not the best thing for the environment. So it's all about having more of a global view on things, so you can find a way for them to have a solution that works. So you're trying to facilitate something that works on all fronts, and to help everybody advance things. So I think something that Laura just brought up was having the designation and being seen as sort of an authority. And I think this is quite important. And myself, when I interface with people in other areas, perhaps at a conference or whatnot, these individuals will just make a snap decision based on who you work for, or the industries that you work with, and assume X, Y, and Z about yourself. And I think having that designation and showing your professionalism, you're able to show them that no, actually you're not some sort of evil being, that you have a broader concept of things. You've got morals and principles, but you've got these guiding principles as being a chartered environmentalist, and what that means. Laura also touched on the fact that she did this because it's a personal choice. You feel good about it, and there's the things that I'd like to achieve and attain and maintain in my professional field. But I think it's quite something to be able to have that, push that forward, and have that designation there as I guess a bit of a support to be recognized when you're interfacing with the public, because you've got an image that needs to be portrayed also. It's hard for people to know where to get information and what information is right and wrong. And I think if you're all speaking from the same page, then that's going to help promote things in the right direction. So it's probably a long-winded answer, there's David, but
grand, thank you. And we have a question in the chat box. So I'm assuming it's all, but what do you think is common, and what are the differences between green chemistry and environmental chemistry? So I'll let you ponder that for a few seconds. And I've immediately looked at Joe, so apologies, I'll ask you if you could answer that one first, not to pick on you.
No, that's fine. It's a really interesting question. And I think that from my experience, green chemistry is an umbrella term. So anytime that any chemist in any field tries to make their process or their system more sustainable or better for the environment is green chemistry. So green chemistry in and of itself isn't really a single discipline. It's everything, so pharmaceutical chemistry is green chemistry because they're constantly trying to increase yields and reduce waste. You've got the oil and gas industry, that's green chemistry because they're trying to maximize the yields while reducing the waste. I think environmental chemistry, and I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not an environmental chemist. I'm a green chemist. But again, what does that mean? Environmental chemistry, to me, is specifically focusing on the effect that we have on the environment. So instead of it making it more efficient, it'll be reducing waste. So I'm trying to think of a good example here. Let's say man hours. So, a process takes 3 days and so many man hours. If you try and reduce the amount of personnel time, that is increasing the efficiency of the system, and therefore it's green chemistry. Whereas if you've got a system which produces 1 ton of hazardous waste and you're reducing that then becomes green chemistry and environmental chemistry. So I think from my perspective, it's more green chemistry is the umbrella term. Environmental chemistry is digging down a little bit more and becoming a bit more granular with it.
Like that. I suppose, Laura, would you have anything to add to that from the waste side of things?
Yeah, I'm probably an environmental chemist who's currently working in a green chemistry industry. I completely agree with Joe that green chemistry it's a broad term. It's my understanding of it, and I know that there's multiple different definitions of it. My understanding of it would be that it takes a broader look right from the beginning of the process right through to the end. So how you design something and how you work through would completely be a green chemistry thing. I think, and Joe's possibly seen this as well, is that people put a lot of work and effort into designing something that is a green chemical, but then nobody thinks about what you're going to do with it when you've finished with it. And the oil and gas industry, hands down, I think the agrochemical industry is the same. It is really good at spending lots and lots of time going, we're going to create something that's less damaging to the environment, that produces less this, that, and the other, whatever metric they're using. But nobody thinks of, when I'm finished with this, what do I do with it? And that's, to my mind, where environmental chemistry kicks in. So we take these very carefully designed products, which all have enviro whatever in their name to show how green they are and how much thought has been put into it, but are still a hazardous waste, have frequently been mixed. They'll have, crude oils or whatever other process they're using mixed through them. And then as part of the waste industry, we then apply environmental chemistry to remove the hazard from that waste, to make it so that the impact of that waste is as small as we could possibly manage. And to my mind, that's kind of the difference between the two, is almost that, as Joe says, that kind of micro and macro scale of looking at the problem.
I suppose, Neil, from your perspective, from the agricultural agrochemical business.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if I can really add a lot more to it. To me, green chemistry is always one of these terms. It's like a marketing term. Everything was organic, everything is green, and I feel that it's one of these terms that's going to wane, and people are going to get full of it, and they'll have another term. To me, it's green chemistry is essentially just efficiency within your system, and perhaps replacing one reagent with another, with the lack of sounding like too much of a chemist. Environmental chemistry, yeah, Joseph, I think you're right. It is about anthropogenic impact, but it is also understanding environmental systems as they sit. There's a lot we don't know about things, the structure of humic acids, fulvic acids, so you could look at that too. But yeah, I think from our perspective in agrochemicals, I mean, if a company wanted to put something on the market, they would have to show, kind of like what you would do for pharmaceuticals, what it is you're using and what happens to it in the environment. So it breaks down into metabolites, and then those metabolites break down into further metabolites. So you have to follow the chain all the way along and show that there's no environmental impact or minimal risk or an acceptable risk at some level, depending on what it is. So there's quite a detailed chain of events. So it's quite detailed. So yeah, I don't know if I can add much more other than that. So there you go.
Fantastic, thank you.
David, could I add to the same topic? That's okay.
Oh yes.
Okay. On the topic of green or environmental chemistry, and it's not something that's been said, but maybe it goes without saying that whether you work in green chemistry or environmental chemistry, you can still become a chartered environmentalist. Would that be? Yeah, I'm learning a lot here. I must admit, I'm not in the chemistry sector at all, whether it's green or environmental, despite having an interest. But so there was generally nods there, which is useful. But is there any differences in the angles that a potential applicant should think about, whether they're from the green chemistry side or the environmental side? I guess it's going to very much depend on the individual's work and what they do. But is there anything either angle should think about more or focus on? I don't know who I'm aiming that at. I must admit, it might even be a question for David. I'm not sure.
Was I expecting to answer a question there? I suppose it depends on the person's background. But in interest of using the panelists and to even out the first person to respond, Laura, would you be willing to jump in first? Because I've directed Neil to start off, and I've gone with Joe for 2 questions already.
I'll let you off for that one. I think we're very keen to put labels on things, and I think Neil's right that green chemistry is the buzzword at the moment. It doesn't stop it being important. It doesn't lessen the impact if that improves our environmental sustainability by people buying into green chemistry. Then it has huge value. I think from my experience, when you take it to grassroots, right down to the basics, it's all working with the environment and looking at the impact you have on the environment. So, I mean, as an environmental chemist working in a green chemistry industry, I don't see that it would change how you would approach your application. I think it would be unique, as every single application would be. And I think there'd be huge value for anybody working in either of those fields to apply.
I suppose just as a little follow-up from the application side of things, we do encounter members and applications from a whole range of industries, and our assessors come from a whole range of industries as well. So just as a kind of little tip or bit of advice for anyone wanting to submit an application, if you're using quite industry-specific terms, which you are, use day in, day out for yourself, please make sure to expand on them or give a bit more detail, because there's no guarantee myself or the assessors will be able to fully understand them. So that's something, often a bit of a feedback I provide is, please just open that abbreviation so we can understand what you're talking about.
Acronyms are always tricky, aren't they?
If I can just jump in on David's last comment there, sorry if you don't mind. So when I did the application, I think you can look at things objectively, right? We deal with a lot of numbers, and you're right. There's a lot of acronyms that we try to abbreviate. You can also look at things more subjectively, right? So I mean, why does a pencil roll across a desk? You can approach it very Newtonian, right? Force, mass, acceleration. But you can also look at it and say, well, it's rolling because there's a table, because there's nothing stopping it from rolling. You know, I got a flat surface. So I guess what I'm getting at is somebody who might be in less of a technical role would be looking at things more subjectively, perhaps. Maybe this is a bit too broad. So I know when I approached the application, it was quite a technical activity. And I think it was great to have input from other people on how to round that out so that it was more subjective. It looked at things from another angle, and I guess it was a really good exercise to be able to explain what I do and my experiences from a holistic or another approach that wasn't just based on cause effect. So I think that's something that is quite important to look at and keep in mind when you're writing your application.
Would you mind if I jump in as well, David?
Crack on.
Brilliant. I just wanted to go back a little bit before I answer that question to what Neil was saying about green chemistry being a buzzword, and I could not agree more. Like, you know, in 100+ years, green chemistry won't exist because it will just be chemistry. All chemistry will be green chemistry. It has to be. You know, for us to be a sustainable society, we need all chemistry to think about these processes within a sustainable and green manner. Therefore, it is a buzzword right now. I'm hoping that, you know, in the future, it will no longer be a buzzword because there will be no need for it, because it will be ingrained into chemistry as much as the periodic table is. Going back to whether or not being an environmental chemist or a green chemist would affect your application, I don't think it necessarily would, because it's all of the attributes aren't specific to a certain discipline. And this is one of the things that I loved about the application. They were very much you could be doing anything. You could never step foot in a lab and be working in legislation and still get all of those attributes down. So you just need to think about the attributes and how your experience fits into them, regardless of what experience that is. If you're a chemist, or if you're a regulator, if you're a consultant, if you're a teacher, you know, it really is, I think, the same approach regardless of what your profession is and what your background is. It just, you need to be able to make sure that you've matched those attributes, and they are quite open in their interpretation, that I found. You know, so the first time I read through the application form, I think, similar to most people, I was like, how do I fit into any of these? But then when you actually start thinking about it and thinking about your experience, thinking, oh well, I've done that, you know, that piece of work which does represent that attribute. I've done management in the terms of, like, I've taught students, you know, because I've never worked in industry. Therefore, the management one, I was like, well, how have I managed anyone? But of course, I've supervised PhD students, I've mentored students, I've looked after people in the lab, and therefore that just feeds into the application form quite holistically.
Fantastic, thank you. Got another question in the chat box. But just to clarify, our university has an Erasmus project for students. The main direction is environmental protection. What do you think about nanotechnology for, I presume, the solution of environmental problems? So I'm not too sure who to direct this to, if there's any preference. Please feel free to raise your hand if you think you want to attack it first, or I'll pick at random.
I'll jump in here, perhaps. Let the other two off the hook. So I can't speak too much on nanotechnology. I mean, I've done a PhD, and some of that was on colloids and nano-sized particles. I think the issue, I'm always apprehensive with everybody's solution. If we look in terms of solving issues with invasive species, the answer is to insert another species that takes over There seems to be one problem followed by another. The solution is the next problem. I think the use of nanotechnology, I think it's great if you're going to do it from a research perspective. I think you really need to understand it and how it's going to impact things before you implement a solution, because well, history repeats itself, and we tend to find that the solution does make the situation a bit worse in some cases. So it's better to know more about it than not. So if you're going to do research on that, that's great. But yeah, we need to know more about it.
Yeah, Joe, feel free to add.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, Neil, I could not agree more. Like, I think that I'm always dubious when someone reports a catch-all solution to environmental problems, because the environmental problems aren't a single problem; they are a myriad of problems. So focusing on one single piece goes back to what Laura was saying, where like someone designs a really, really sustainable and really green and really environmentally friendly small bit of the process, but then doesn't think about where the feedstock's coming from and doesn't think about what's going to happen to it at the end of life. So I think that, yes, nanotechnology is going to be helping along the way, but you need to keep in mind everything else as well. So it's not going to be a single research group or even a single discipline that solves environmental problems. It is going to have to be a team effort from loads of different disciplines. And I'm not even just talking about chemistry here. I'm talking about, everyone needs to be working towards this single goal for it to work. So, and I have no idea what sort of nanotechnology you're talking about there. So that's another thing that, it depends on what the technology is. It depends on whether or not they've been looking at the full life cycle assessment, looking at it holistically, or just focusing on solving one problem, like Neil said, potentially at the detriment of another.
Just going to jump in to finish, if that's okay, David. So yeah, absolutely. I am a complete geek. I love all the ideas of nanotechnology. I played with some during my research. I have to say that because it didn't actually make it into my final thesis. I would absolutely love for it to be the answer. Because it just appeals to me on so many levels. But yeah, I don't think there is a catch-all. It would be brilliant if there was. I think with, as Neil said, a lot of research and knowledge of the complete impact of anything, it has the possibility to solve specific issues that it is targeted to. But yeah, there is a lot of danger of running before one can walk with it, and well-intentioned meddling causing unknown issues further down the line. But yeah, it's really exciting work. My PhD did focus on nanoparticles and using that as traces to interact with environmental systems. On catchment levels. So I'm possibly guilty of falling down that trap already a little bit. But yeah, no, some of the work in carbon capture and things as well on nanoscales is really exciting. And I think we will definitely go down that route at some point. I'm not sure that we're quite ready yet. But there's a lot of good research going into that, and I think it's very valuable that continues.
There's just one comment which I think ties in quite nicely with everything you were saying. There is some evidence that nanoparticles can get into groundwater systems, so while nanotechnology may be useful in treating contaminants, the system has to be designed and implemented properly. Sort of nicely weaves in with all three of your answers. I'd say open up to if there's any other questions any of the panelists, any of the attendees would like to raise. Or Phil, you've come off mute. Does that mean you've got one in the front of your mind?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I'm picking up on one thing that Joseph mentioned, which is about his experience with the application and for CEnv registration. And you looked at your initial reading through the application, you thought there's bits in there you weren't sure how you met, and then you had a bit more of a think about it, and then it made sense, kind of thing. I wondered whether Neil and Laura had anything to share in relation to their experience when they went about completing the application. Were there elements that you looked at and you didn't have the experience in that particular area, and you had to go away and you talk to your management or whatever, and you were able to get that experience? Or were there elements that you were also unsure about, and you worked with someone who were able to point in the direction and say, you do have that experience in this way, you shape it like this, and that kind of thing? Did you have any experience like that, or did you look at the application form and think, and then you started typing and then that was it? I'll go to Laura.
I'll be completely honest. I am that person that just starts writing and see what comes out and deletes the extra bits off at the end. I think my experience was probably relatively unique because I am quite isolated from other chemists. Whilst I'm surrounded by people who are passionate about the environment, I have a limited support network where I work, and limited options of people to speak to. So there was a lot of kind of conversations with myself to kind of talk through problems. Bizarrely enough, one of the attributes I kind of struggled with most, and I say bizarrely because it's, so as it was pointed out, it is actually what I do all day as a job, was how I kind of have communicate to a wider audience. And I was actually, I volunteer with a girl guiding group, and I was in, and I was kind of chatting to one of the leaders and going, oh, I'm trying to do this application, I need to get it in, but I'm really stuck on this one bit. And she kind of turned around and pointed out the obvious. You know, she's just like, we've just done Crest Awards focusing on environment with our unit. What do you mean you don't talk to a wider group of non-specialists? You know, I mean, you can speak to 7-year-olds. I mean, and it is. I think, like most things, that inspiration quite often comes from unexpected places, and that discussion that you have with friends and family, and not necessarily experts, are often more valuable than people telling you what you already know.
A couple of points to pick up on there. 7-year-olds can be the hardest audience for a start, but also you don't have to have every aspect of the application doesn't need to come from your current job or even a job at all. You get experience and knowledge from all sorts of different areas of your life, and as long as that's at a certain, displaying certain competencies within that, then that's absolutely valid. So Neil, anything from you on that one?
Well, I agree. I mean, if you're talking to a 7-year-old, it's why all the time. So, and you do have to tailor your language and your response to give it a bit of a context so it's understandable. Yeah, Laura, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's all about being able to see your experience and how it relates to the questions. I mean, the everyday real life examples that or maybe outside of the work context could be quite fitting for the application. I'm stretching my brain to try to remember specific examples of the application where this happened. I know that I had somebody here at work I was able to bounce ideas off of, and they were quite good at pointing out examples of how perhaps communication or project management or whatnot within the context of what we do, because I deal with regulators, I deal with clients in industry, I deal with clients that don't speak English as a first language. So you're always trying to tailor the message and make sure it's across in a clear and concise manner. I will come back to the website for the society and the environment. The video that I watched on preparing the application was vital. I really got a lot of good information. I think one of the biggest things was just be honest. I think one of the points that they kept driving home: don't invent stuff or embellish. And I'm not saying that I would ever be tempted to create something that doesn't exist, but I think, I mean, when you see an application with a bunch of boxes that need to be ticked, you think that they need to be ticked, but maybe there's suggestions or just trying to put you on the right path of what you could add to that section. So, I mean, go through it. If you've got the quality, add it. If you don't try to make something small into something large, or make it more grand than it is. Be realistic, and I think you'll get further being realistic than not.
Thank you very much.
You say, Joe, feel free. You got your hand up.
Yeah, can I jump in here as well? So this is more a comment for Phil and David, actually, which is that David shared with me a document which was an exemplary application form, and it had in it different answers from different disciplines. And I found that absolutely invaluable because obviously, this is a broad-ranging multidisciplinary chartership. And so knowing what a person working in academic research would write really gave me the help I needed to know how to frame my answers. And I think there were like 3 or 4 different example, people, one from like legislation, one from a consultancy, one from industry, and one from academia. And so like, I just want to say that that's really good. And obviously it's challenging to capture all of the disciplines that you're going to have applying, but, continuing to grow that would be extraordinarily useful for, for anyone applying in the future. And then going back to the actual application, one more, small piece of advice I would say is that when I went through it the first time, I was trying to find a different example for every single attribute, which, can be quite hard. And, I soon realized that you don't need to do that because one example, one project that you've done can actually fit into multiple attributes. So you can say it proved that I was competent in this way, but also that same example proved that I was competent in this other way. So I think that was a sticking point for me that I sort of was struggling with for a while until I think I was talking to someone and they were like, well, why don't you use that example again? Just, because it's proving a different point at this point. And I was like, oh, that is good.
So just on that, you mentioned the sort of example topics. That form has now been incorporated into the CEnv guidance document, and a new one was published last month, towards the end of last month. So it's entitled Applicant's Guide to Becoming a CEnv. So we refreshed it, and we've now got that table in, so you can get an idea of, I can't off the top of my head remember what 4 sectors or 4 industries we used, but we sort of give 4 different industries like summary topics for that we use to get to competencies, including a bit of how to write the competency in the share format. So please feel free you'll find it on the website, please feel free to have a look at it. That's all been incorporated into just one document, so it's sort of a catch-all in terms of information. Just looking at the time, Phil, are there any final questions?
No questions from me. Very pleased that the content we put out there is sounding very useful. So always nice to have that kind of feedback. Our work is working. That's a strange sentence to make, but it's good to hear. Very good to hear.
Well, Neil, Laura and Joe, thank you very much for giving us an hour of your time to go through these, give a bit of backstory and answer our questions. Thank you very much, Phil, for hosting, and thank you all all attendees for tuning in for an hour, and thank you very much for those who submitted questions. And if you have any questions about Chartered Environmentalist going forward, feel free to drop me an email at cenv@rsc.org. Happy to answer any questions where I can.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank
you very much.